In Admiral Daala's hands, the remnants of the Empire became a machine, a massive, cohesive engine being tuned to peak performance. Cogs spun, components fit together, armament factories processed resources into additional weapons, TIE fighters, blast boats, AT-STs, and structural components of new Star Destroyers. Formerly downtrodden workers, even aliens and females, were given responsibilities and put to work for the glory of the Empire. Daala, now aboard her great black ship, the Nighthammer, moved from system to system, knitting together once scattered allegiances, cementing loyalties, and squeezing more work out of subjects who had been lax for far too long, drawing tight the Imperial net. That quote is from Darksaber, Book 2 of what many call the Callista trilogy. Admiral Daala effectively ended the Warlord era by bringing together rival Imperial factions, creating a unified Imperial remnant. While this remnant represents the best hope for the Empire since Thrawn and Palpatine, it suffers a terrible loss when trying to assault Luke's Jedi Praxium on Yavin. If you'd like to hear the story for yourself, you can listen to it for free by going to audibletrial.com/EckhartsLadder, but I'll be breaking down the battle in detail today. So by this point, Daala had created a fairly flexible offensive force, including 45 Imperial Star Destroyers, the Nighthammer, a Super Star Destroyer, and 112 Victory Star Destroyers. The Victories, most of which were painted red and known as the Crimson Command, were under the leadership of Colonel Cronus, and prior to this battle were striking at rebel targets across the galaxy, raising military bases and peaceful worlds alike. Eventually, Daala recognized that the Jedi Order was the greatest threat to her newly created Imperial remnant, and readied the fleet. First, she sent her second-in-command, Admiral Pellaeon, with a fleet of Star Destroyers, as she readied the jet black Nighthammer, a Super Star Destroyer. Both the first and the second wave had the exact same goal, utterly defeating and destroying Luke's Jedi Academy on Yavin. As a note, the Academy was still fairly new at this point. Luke was still learning how to be a Grand Master, and his first class of Jedi Knights were just beginning to graduate, including some notable ones like Kip Duran, Cam Solusar, Corran Horn, and many others who would reappear throughout Legends. Two of his students, Dorsk 81 and Kip Duran, were actually away from the Academy, having witnessed Daala's massed fleet and overhearing plans to attack the Jedi Academy. They alert the New Republic and immediately return to Yavin, warning the Jedi students, who are at this point without Grand Master Skywalker. First, Pellaeon emerges with a sizable fleet of 17 Star Destroyers. The fleet moves in, recognizes that Yavin possesses no formal defenses, and prepares AT-AT strike teams. Knowing that the New Republic would be some time in preparing a defense, the Jedi begin their own guerrilla-style ground defensive before retreating to the main temple. The Jedi soon realize that the orbiting fleet has an almost unlimited amount of reinforcements, and that they can't win by fighting small battles. They need to work together. As Dorsk 81 travels to the top of the Great Temple, the 30 other Jedi begin joining their minds. I've collected a few excerpts from the book which explains what happens next. The new Jedi Knights joined together with invisible cords of light. The bonds were strong, reinforcing their skills from person to person. Dorsk 81 stood in the middle, the eye of the storm, where he could draw upon the Force, magnify it with a strength greater than he had ever conceived. He reached upward with his hands, picturing the Star Destroyers in orbit, 17 wedge-shaped engines of death, bristling with weapons, loaded with more TIE fighters and assault troops. His thoughts soared outward, leaving the emerald jungle moon behind, and trailing behind his presence came a battering ram of invisible, irresistible force that would be undetectable on any Imperial scanners. He found them. They were greater in mass than he had imagined. Even so, he used the Force to push. The Force seemed to be a bottomless well, offering more than he had thought possible. But as Dorsk 81 pulled it inside himself, he also felt the danger, the destructive potential. Too much of this strength could be his downfall. He pushed again, straining harder, abandoning all caution. The Star Destroyers moved slightly in space, bucking and resisting, but it was still not enough. In his mind, Dorsk 81 saw yet another wing of TIE fighters launched with orders to finish the destruction of the Jedi Knights. That must never happen. Dorsk 81 exerted his mind to the breaking point. His body trembled. His yellow eyes saw nothing around him, because every thought was focused out into space where Pellaeon's Star Destroyers waited. Without a second thought, without hesitation, Dorsk 81 reached all the way down, drawing from the deep wells of the Force that the 30 gathered Jedi had opened for him. He took more and more without restraint, hoarding it within himself, letting it build as he absorbed the full searing power amplified through the Great Temple, focused it through his body, and launched it at the fleet of Star Destroyers. "Move," he shouted. The words themselves were like power incarnate, white-hot energy flaming out of his mouth, from his fingertips, surging through his body and burning. The inside of his head went bright like a star-going supernova. He felt it strike the 17 Star Destroyers, and they slammed backward like twigs in a typhoon. The shockwave flung the entire fleet, cast them helplessly beyond the fringes of the Yavin system, their computers fried, their propulsion systems wrecked, still accelerating from the storm of the Force. Pelion's fleet of Star Destroyers went away. Dorsk 81 also rode the storm, to its ultimate unknown destination. So normally I don't excerpt large portions of text because I think you guys should read them yourselves, but this is a pretty cool moment. However, even with the death and sacrifice of Dorsk 81 and the removal of Pelion's fleet, the battle was far from over. The second wave of the assault soon appeared, the Super Star Destroyer Nighthammer. This time, instead of bothering with a ground invasion, Daala, in her anger, decides to roast the planet from orbit. Thankfully, she doesn't know the location of the temple and is not in contact with the previously landed troops, so she's only able to fire indiscriminately. Soon, the Millennium Falcon, loaded with Han, Leia, Luke, Callista, Chewie, and the droids, arrives over the planet. It is immediately attacked by Daala's fleet and retreats to Yavin. There, Luke and his then-lover Callista, a former Jedi who'd been cut off from the Force, join the young Jedi Knights in fighting off the first wave of landed troops from Pelion's fleet, as the forests burn around them. During the commotion, Callista slips away, steals a landed TIE bomber, and heads to orbit. Bluffing her way onto the Nighthammer, she finds an isolated bay filled with other TIE bombers. At the same time, realizing that the Super Star Destroyer would eventually obliterate the entire planet, Han and Leia and the Millennium Falcon head off to space. However, the freighter is completely overwhelmed not only by the Super Star Destroyer, but also hundreds of TIE fighters. Soon after, Admiral Akbar in his Mon Calamari cruiser, the Galactic Voyager, arrives and picks up the Falcon. He has only a very small task force with him, meaning that the New Republic is still heavily outnumbered. This is made worse by the arrival of 20 Victory Star Destroyers of the Crimson Command. The New Republic manages to destroy 4 of them, including the flagship, the 13X, but soon only the Galactic Voyager is left with dying shields. Back on the Nighthammer, Callista arms explosives which cause the grouped TIE fighters to explode, crippling the SSD. As the Dreadnought drifts, pulled towards the gas giant of Yavin by its gravity, a large New Republic fleet arrives, made up of, among other things, 5 Mon Calamari cruisers. With the Dreadnought disabled, the Imperial fleet is now completely overwhelmed. Pelion's forces, who had been pushed quite a distance away and have had their navigational data wiped, are unable to jump to hyperspace and thus still some time away. The Nighthammer is thus evacuated and a few Victories manage to escape with its crew. On the Dreadnought, Daala manages to subdue Callista, who had been attempting to kill the Admiral, and escapes through an escape pod. She leaves Callista to die, although the Jedi does survive and would appear in the next book as well as future legend stories. On the ground, Luke and his Jedi are able to mop up the rest of the Empire's ground attackers, securing the planet, at least for the immediate future. The effects of this battle were huge. Daala was seen as the Empire's best chance, and their defeat at Yavin represented the end of the Imperial era. The Remnant would slowly die, losing systems over time and without the opportunity to make further grabs for power. In fact, as the Dreadnought is disabled, one Imperial officer begins to cry, knowing that the Empire would now never be able to obtain its former glory. There are also really some tactical errors here, especially on Pelion's end. Why bother landing a full fighting force at all, especially unwieldy walkers like AT-ATs? I think the Empire's best course of action would have been to scout the planet with a few TIE fighters, identify the main Jedi base, and just rain down destruction from the skies. I mean, there's no fleet in orbit, so there's no pressure on your Star Destroyers. It's true that you could still be pushed away by the Jedi on the surface, but there's no real way to prevent against that. That is, of course, just my opinion. What do you think of this battle? Do you think the Jedi's use of the Force here is cool, or is it a bit too much? If you've read this book and the Callista trilogy as a whole, also let me know what you think of that down in the comments. If you haven't read it, again, you can use my Audible link at audibletrial.com/EckhartsLadder. Anyway, until next time guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.